Okay, so at the top of page 10, then this is the last half of Moore's demonstration, right? So he talks about 3 conditions that you need to satisfy the proof. The first condition is that of difference, that there's something new, there's something different. There's a distinction between the premise and the conclusion, that it isn't a tautological argument. Where does he pinpoint and identify that difference? He identifies that difference in the performative act built in the premise, right? That's specifically where, and I've gone on at length to describe how he did that. Okay, so at the top of page 10 then, quote, because it is quite obvious that the conclusion might have been true even if the premise, and I should change that to if, even if the premise had been false. Right? As we know, anytime we're talking about conditionals, you can have a false premise, a true conclusion, and maintain the truth. This is epistemologically problematic. You definitely cannot have a true premise and false conclusion. And the idea is, how could that have worked? Obviously, if he didn't have hands. Right? If he didn't have hands, then he wouldn't have been able, the truth of that, here's my right hand, it would have been false. He doesn't have hands. But the idea is, you can still arrive at the conclusion that there are 2 human hands, it's just that I, as a human, don't have hands. Right? That's not to say that all humans have hands, obviously, right? So and that's the genius of this, right? That's the genius of that, right? Because it is quite obvious that the conclusion, quote, because it is quite obvious that the conclusion might have been true even if the premise had been false, right? The premise being, here's a right hand, here's a left hand, accompanied with the gestures for each respective hand, right? If there was an inability to performatively demonstrate as premised, right hand, left hand, it in no sense undermines the legitimacy that there are 2 human hands, right? You just call in another human being and you be like, hey, you do it, right? So my inability to performatively demonstrate it does not undermine the truth of the conclusion. It just requires, in order to maintain epistemological consistency, someone else to perform and demonstrate the act. Why is that of any importance? Because, and I don't want to go off on it, I mean I could go off on a tangent. I'll tell you one little bit of my motivation of why I do all these series, why I'm doing all these videos, and why I'm as manic as I am. Is because there is a sense in which, deep down in the recesses of my mind, I want, as I get older, to be able to say, I demonstrated when I was young. I demonstrated when I was in my prime what was possible. And I'm not, this is way off tangent, but it's true, and it does relate. Everything relates. You know, I didn't compromise my family. I didn't compromise my children. I didn't compromise my wife. I didn't compromise friends, because I don't have any. I didn't compromise anything, right? That there is a sense in which human beings do have the capacity to do this, to live a meaningful life. The meaning, as Moore has absolutely magnificently sort of demonstrated, is in the demonstration. The meaning is in the demonstration. The meaning is in the proof. The meaning is in the performative act of showing the difference between the conclusion and the assumptions, right, and the premise. It's the demonstration. It's you. I take this outside of the context of logic. I take this outside of the context of just plain epistemology, and this is the problem that I have, being the type of philosopher that I am, is that, remember, again, yet again, going back to my anti-intellectualism video, is that you read this, you understand this, and if you're honest with yourself, it has to transform the way you think. For me, it did more than just transform the way you think. It became a lifestyle. And after I finish this next book, my book after that is going to be a sort of a mass appeal book. I don't want to do, I've demonstrated that I can do really, really rigorous stuff, and I've demonstrated that I can think critically. So, in a sense, I've satisfied a condition to appease objectors who would think that Dr. Campbell isn't really who he says he is. It's been demonstrated now. I can do those hard things. But what I have yet to do is to demonstrate sort of accessibility to a much broader subset of the population, quote unquote, the masses, the general public, and access them with my writing. I've obviously accessed them with these videos, but I have yet to access them with my writing, and thus after this next project, my one after that, I'm positing work for me in the future, is to demonstrate an accessibility to the average Joe, because we are all, in a sense, from that source. We are all average Joes. There really isn't anything exceptional other than the ability to demonstrate. The reason why and I'll move back into the lecture in a second, but this is very important for me so that we contextualize all of this rather dense stuff. What's absolutely critical for me is that there be a recognition that the dude who's amassed $100 million worth of wealth has demonstrated his understanding of capital. The dude who can do the really, really rigorous mathematical proofs has demonstrated his understanding of not just the formula, but the axioms that inform the formulas. Right? The person who has demonstrated mastery on the use of language incorporates language in order to galvanize the population. Right? To be Berkeley is more than just saying that you are. That's what more saying. Right? To be is to be perceived, yes, but to be is really to demonstrate. To be is to prove it in the act of demonstrating it. Don't talk about it, be about it. Right? It's a little hood philosophy. Let's keep it funky. Still from the streets. Right? That's why I love Nike's slogan, right? I love Nike's slogan, right? Just do it. Don't talk about it. Right? Don't just look the part, be the part. Right? Anyone can put on a suit and tie, come up here and say that they're a professor, fake everything, fake credentials, fake knowledge. It's another thing to actually do it. Well, you don't believe me? Let me do it. Here's me doing what I'm doing. Here's me demonstrating it, right? There is a sense in which, and I have to start my clock, I forgot to start my clock. I'm sort of excited with this lecture. Don't just talk about it, be about it, right? You have to demonstrate it. So existence isn't about perception. It's not to deny that there is a perceptive aspect of existence, right? But Berkeley, you're shortchanging existence, argues more, by undermining the role of demonstrative proof. This is my right hand, and that demonstrative proof is not a product of your mind, right? It's not a product of your mind. It exists independent to your mind as an external reality, right? And you would never be able to prove that it did exist as a product of your mind. It's an impossible. That proof is not cognitively possible. So hopefully you get as much as I'm getting out of it. I'm getting a lot out of this. So number 2. So I've sort of belabored the point in the first proof. The second, quote, unless the premise which I adduced was something which I knew to be the case. Right? It has to be the case. I know it to be the case. I had a friend on Facebook hit me up, a rather good friend, virtual friend. He hits me up on Facebook a couple days ago. He goes, I'm a philosopher. He was going to do political science. This is the truth. This is the truth he tells me. So he says, I was going to do political science, blah, blah, blah. I scored really well. I decided I wanted to do philosophy because of the stuff that I've been doing in the world, and he wants to do this. So, of course, I'm excited because I'm helping the discipline that I love by feeding it more brilliant young minds. And he goes, but there's a problem, right? I'm sort of having this sort of mental breakdown that we all have. And we all know that John Stuart Mills went mad once he realized that the GHP meant that his happiness was completely irrelevant. He was that consistent in his logic, John Stuart Mills that is, that his recognition that the system which he is constructing undermines his own personal happiness. Rather than saying, I'm going to do away with the system, he ends up becoming miserable. That's how consistently logical philosophers are. That's why I adore philosophers, because the system is more important than their own personal happiness. The consistency of the argument takes precedence over their own happiness. You gotta love people like that. So shout out to John Stuart Mills for having a mental breakdown. So my friend, he's like, yo, Jason, I'm freaking out over here for any number of reasons. I realize, and I'm not going to put his business on blast, but I'm starting to realize just how serious this is. And I was like, dude, I've been where